So these are some others. Anybody heard of Hashgraph?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know, just spotted it in the last week or two.
Okay. Anybody else familiar with Hashgraph? No. Okay. This is a very interesting one. Basically, it's closed. It's not open source. It's permission based, and they're using what they call a gossip protocol. So it's basically one person vouching for another person based on their activity on the network. And it's gossip about gossip. If you can get your heads around this now, you'll be doing well. But essentially speaking, Anne tells Mary about John, okay? And John tells Fred about Sheila, okay? And Sheila talks to Mary. So you're developing a building.
Is this not how lightning works? A little bit, as in, you know, you're like own little group, and
Well,
I vouch for you, so you can send to I know whatever, because I can send to you because I vouch for you and I know I know.
yeah, the Lightning Network, basically it's like taking a certain amount of the blockchain offline. You know, it's very similar to what we call a sidechain. So instead of having to process all of the transactions in the blockchain and appending every previous transaction, okay, you're absolutely right. You have a sort of a trusted group of people that come together. Yeah.
It's like Irish Terrence back in the day.
Yeah, a bit like that, yeah. So you better watch out for Maisie with the twitching net curtains. And, you need to keep your powder dry there on that one. So no, it's interesting. But look, the bottom line, Swirl's Hashgraph, there's a guy called Lehman Baird who's behind it. Genius, absolutely great guy altogether. And he's been working on this for a couple of years now. But the only downside is the fact that he has a patent on it and he's not releasing any fees and he's targeting commercial entities. So he'll be targeting the banks the same way, let's say, Ripple would be. So Ripple is very much gearing towards the banks and making sure that they have a product there that is completely controlled, which some people would argue will take away how effective and how efficient it's going to be in the long term. A lot of people maintain open source. I mean, we're all familiar with Linux, Linux Foundation, whereby the foundation has been built up on an open source, community-based structure. So it's people helping other people. When you start cutting other people off, there are more chances that the thing becomes stagnant and doesn't develop as well as it could. That's not to say it can't work, and particularly with 100 banks behind Ripple, I'm sure it will do. Dash is a very interesting system. A friend of mine wants to open a Dash bar in Manila, just taking Dash for his drinks, for his cocktails. And he's been working for Kraken for the last 2 years, and he's basically saying that's his cryptocurrency of choice because it's quick, it's easy, it's very much low-cost transactions. Ripple, as I mentioned, round about 100 banks on board now. It's interesting that they're not going to be using the token. So they're actually going to be using what they call Current X, which is basically a means of being able to join up all these parties. At the moment, if you send a transaction to somebody, let's say in Japan, it can go up to 14 people that have to act as middlemen in that whole process. So what they're doing is they're streamlining that process. It's not blockchain, okay, so just we're really clear on that. But the blockchain has given them a good kick up the ass to say, we're coming for you, and this is their response. On the face of it, it looks good, and it's done very well in terms of coin market cap, particularly before Christmas. But it's nosedive like the rest of them. It's very interesting to see how Bitcoin is still the leader. And others are following. It seems to dictate the pace. So we have Stellar as well, which is Also founded by a very interesting gentleman by the name of Jed McCaleb, and he left Ripple to form the Stellar Foundation. And they have a Stellar consensus protocol. Now that's open source, high speed, lower cost of remittance. I mean, you're talking about 0.00004 of a cent for a transaction. Now the reason why it's like that, the reason why it's not free, is to prevent spamming. So we also have IOTA, which uses the Tangle network, which might be relevant for that gentleman in the back there. For you mentioned automotive, is that right? Transportation. Proof of temperature, yeah. See, the last thing you want is to have a network which will attract fees and a large overhead in terms of transaction time, because you want, I would imagine you have your limits in terms of how quickly it should take for a transaction to pass from A to B to C. So yeah, it's not a blockchain, it's a Tangle network, and you can imagine just a series of connections going. They're what we call asynchronous rather than synchronous. So in other words, it's not happening like one block at a time. It's actually happening sort of at the same time. So, and then crossing over once certain validation happens. And then Oracle's is another one which is also interesting, and they use what we call proof of authority. So these are independent validators. So these are people that have been appointed almost like as individual oracles. They claim to be making the proof of work obsolete through their particular their technologies and making it cheaper. But like I said in the previous talk, there's a lot of people competing for the same space, for the same sort of market in this, and it could very much just distill down into a VHS Betamax type of a scenario. Or what was the other one? Super Audio CD versus DVD audio.